Hi everyone, it's Sandra. Look what I found in this dense clump of cedar roots that I pulled out of one of my garden worm towers. This is a sample of my native Vancouver Island worm, Arctiostrotus Vancouverensis, and he is really stuck into this giant clump of roots. These roots actually found their way into my garden worm tower from an adjacent cedar hedge. That just shows you how nutritious the material is inside a worm bin. So when we emptied the contents out into this styrofoam bin and I started seeing these giant guys hiding in the roots, I grabbed my camera and started filming. At the end of the video, I'll show you when I take all the worms I found and add them to one of my worm bins. I have 4 of these garden worm towers, which we harvest by emptying the contents into these styrofoam totes before refilling the buckets with new bedding. I have a playlist about these garden worm towers showing everything from when we set them up, how we maintain and harvest them. And I must say they are the easiest worm bins to manage. They do tend to get a lot of more chunkier material added because it's everything you just pull off your plants in the garden. This isn't the first time we've had roots find their way into a bucket, but these cedar roots are something else. And so is this big guy. And here's another one of his gorgeous friends. So if you live somewhere with a climate that's conducive to worms surviving through the winter, or even their cocoon surviving through the winter, I strongly encourage you to look into putting one of these food-grade garden worm buckets into your beds. Even one of my friends who lives in a much colder climate where cocoons won't survive, she has a garden worm tower that she just pulls out of the ground, out of the garden every fall and puts it in a garage that is mildly heated, kept above freezing through the winter before reinstalling her garden bucket in the spring. So I wondered why I'm finding these worms embedded into this dense root ball, instead of going out and eating the worm bin bedding and food scraps that we've been feeding this bucket all through the season. I must say that I routinely find my large Arctiostrotus Vancouverensis worms in my garden worm towers. I actually think they got stuck in there. The holes in the side of the bucket are probably not big enough once these worms grow to a certain size for the worms to go in and out freely from the holes. So I actually have thought that before when we've harvested the buckets and I find some of these giants in there. I go, oh dear, he was probably stuck in there and couldn't go back and forth to the garden. So that theory explains why I tend to find quite a few of the larger Arctiostrotus Vancouverensis in my garden worm towers, but it doesn't explain why I'm finding such a concentration of them in this cedar root ball, including members of this species of worm that are small enough to get in and out of the holes in the side of the bucket, or even easily worm their way out of these roots. I don't actually think any of these worms were permanently stuck in this root ball. I think they really wanted to be there. So that's when I did a bit of digging into the research, and I actually found that the fibrous roots of cedar are particularly rich in the mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizae is a symbiotic relationship that forms between plant roots and a fungus. The mycorrhizal fungi develop as a result of the exudates, which are the sugars and other secretions from the roots. This encourages and sustains the fungi. In turn, the mycorrhizal fungi greatly expand the network of the reach of the plant roots themselves into the surrounding soil, basically putting out feelers that can report back on moisture and nutrients and can actually transport minerals and nutrients back to the plants. The fungi contain elements that help break down soil to make it available to the plants. Different type of plants attract different types of mycorrhizal fungi. Now this is cedar, so I looked at the research that dealt with the forest-dwelling mycorrhizal fungi. In a forest, the network of hyphae, those little fingers that reach out into the soil surrounding a tree, they actually facilitate communication between the trees of a forest. It's absolutely amazing. They know which trees are being infected by insects or other disease. They know which trees are suffering from a lack of moisture or other nutrients. And they can actually facilitate distribution of resources to that area, or if the damage is too severe, cut off distribution of resources to that area, basically to sacrifice that tree or region of trees for the preservation of the greater forest. So these cedar roots that I found in my garden worm tower are different than roots that you might add to your compost pile. These roots were still alive. They were still attached to the cedar tree. Roots that break down in your compost pile are being attacked by saprophytic fungi, not mycorrhizal fungi. Here's a sneak peek of my interim collection of worms that I'm finding. Some of them are trying to make their way out of the container. So there's a symbiotic relationship between the plant roots and the fungi, but also the worms themselves. Worms will physically distribute the fungi through the forest network, bringing them to the roots of the trees as the tree roots emit those exudates. Of course, we all know that worms love sugar, and the exudates contain a high carbohydrate content. This ancient worm species has developed in harmony with our beautiful western cedar forests. And here, as I release them into Gilligan and we can watch these magnificent creatures dive down into the bedding, we can appreciate the role they play in keeping our forests free from disease and able to withstand the changing drought conditions. These worms chose to live in a familiar environment, the fibrous network of cedar roots in my worm bin, rather than in the maple leaves and food scraps. This network of cedar roots most closely approximates their native habitat, which I thought was just amazing. The exudates and mycorrhizal fungi of that network of cedar roots nourished these worms. They went back to their roots, so to speak. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye for now.